So we beat on, boats against the current, borne back ceaselessly into the past. So this video isn't going to be about F. Scott Fitzgerald, although I hope there are a few F. Scott fans out there. I just love the quote, and that's one of my favorite books. This quote is probably a little bit more appropriate for what I'm going to talk about today. This We're going to talk about the past. I'm JC with the Appalachian Authors Guild. We had a workshop, so to speak, this past week at Fiddlers in Abingdon. And it's always great when we have as many people in person as we can get for our meetings. But we also offer Zoom, and sometimes, if we can, we do live on Facebook. But this past week we did Zoom, and the members of the guild thought it'd be a good idea to do a quick video, a supplement to what we were talking about. Those that watched it that wanted to kind of go back over what we talked about, and for those who weren't able to make it. Now, last month on our evening guild Zoom, we had this topic called From Folklore to Fiction. And that's what I talked about at Fiddlers this past week. And I got to be honest with you, I'll keep this video fairly short for those that are watching. But when I did this presentation to the evening crew, I realized we have a lot of really good writers in this guild and people who have a lot of experience, been writing for a long time, and some who haven't, but are still very good at what they do and very well read. So I thought, what can I add to the topic of from folklore to fiction that we don't already use, characteristics and things that we already use in our stories, our books, our short stories, our poems. You're going to see a lot of similar techniques from writing folklore that you would just a general short story or novel. So I wanted to go over a little bit of that and try to add something a little different, something that we could all find useful. So before I get into the topic of folklore, we all know what folklore is. I'll give a general definition of it, but we all know what folklore is. And when we look back in the past and we consider those stories, whether it's something we heard our grandpa or grandma tell us when we were little, or when we were camping with friends, or growing up at camp, or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts, stories we heard around the campfire. But when it comes to modern Appalachia, I'm going to just toss this question out there, just something for you to think of, just to think about. And if you come up with any suggestions or ideas, feel free and leave them in the comments section below here on YouTube, or on Facebook, wherever you're watching this at. Which modern Appalachian experiences today, or not necessarily today, but in the last few years, 20 years, 30 years even, might eventually become folklore for our region in the future? We know a lot about some of our own folklore, but what things have happened in the last 20, 30 years that could be folklore 50 years from now in Appalachia? And who better to write that than us, Appalachian writers? So think about that, and we'll kind of get back to that. I'll circle back to that at the end, and I hope to see. I'm excited to see what thoughts and ideas you have in the comments in the days and weeks to come. But what is folklore? Well, just a general definition I looked up online was the traditional beliefs and customs and stories of a community passed through generations by word of mouth. So that was the first thing that it kind of struck me, that oral tradition that we all know very well here in Appalachia. And I would like to remind you that, actually during the Great Depression, the FDR administration sent out researchers and writers out all across Appalachia as part of the Works Project. And what they wanted to do was collect Appalachian stories. And you can find these collections in the Library of Congress. Some of them been published on, you can find on Amazon, the old Foxfire books, things like that. But when you get a body of popular myth and beliefs that sort of relate to a particular place or an activity or a group of people, that's when you have good folklore. And there's various different types of folklore. As I kind of looked it up, I thought, well, that could be really anything. Out of the five, there's several different types of folklore. I'm just going to mention them here. And I know a lot of writers in the guild have already written a lot of these things. There's fairy tales. There's legends. There's myths. sometimes what's the difference, kind of blur the lines on some of those tall tales, the jack tales from that you find in the old Works Project, the old oral traditions that were passed down called the jack tales, fables. Folklore is really just stories about our customs and beliefs of a group of people or a particular community. So here in Central Appalachia, we have a lot of those. Um, myth and lore is just really a type of that. Here's some trivia for you. I brought this up to everybody. Um, there was a guy. Let me find it. um, there was a guy. Actually, the name of the guy who actually, I think his name was John Toms, was the guy who actually coined the phrase folklore. And I thought that was actually, I'm writing on the back of the paper and I forget to look. But yeah, he actually coined the phrase folklore. So if you're ever on Jeopardy and somebody asks, William John Toms, he was a British writer. But folklore has one of the things is that it offers up is it really has a deep meaning. Folklore does, and I want to go over two or three stories of folklore that are very popular in our region too. I'll go over that here in just a minute. But what qualifies as folklore? I mean, we mentioned the five types, but it could be not just legend. It could be riddles. It could be songs. It could be tales, proverbs. Urban legends is another very popular type of story that people write. Nursery rhymes can also qualify as that. But not just that, it could be real life event like rituals and festivals and plays that you see, dramas that you see based on our region. Really makes me think of some of the plays that I've seen in the past at the Barter Theater over in Abingdon. But the thing about folklore is all the stories, they sort of have certain types of characteristics that are common. One is they've been shared orally for generations. Now, as time goes on, not everything's going to be shared orally. It could be shared in writing, it could be shared in video, it could be shared on blogs that people have online. So there's any number of ways now people share stories. But they also follow very straightforward plot lines, and they have the use of just simple characters, nothing really overly complex. They also solve a central conflict or problem, just like many of the novels or short stories you already write. They demonstrate decision making. They reinforce consequences of our actions. That's a big thing that's in one of the main characteristics of good folklore. It reinforces those consequences. But it also highlights our shared moral values, our shared lessons learned, our shared fears and hopes. Here's another trivia if you're ever on Jeopardy. The oldest folklore that I managed to find as I was doing research on the topic was the Epic of Gilgamesh. And we have several pieces of folklore that we think about when you think about things like, well, for example, in foreign regions, the vampire was a character in folklore. Here, a little closer to home, we have Paul Bunyan, we have John Henry, drive that hammer home. That's kind of integral here in our region. But Robin Hood was also folklore overseas. But our modern culture actually needs good folklore. Functions of good folklore to fiction. And here's some of the things actually four things that good folklore to fiction actually will have. One, just like any story or book or movie, it's going to entertain. Two, it's got to validate your cultural values. Good folklore will do that. It also educates you about your history and about the people around you. And the fourth thing, not just it educates, but it actually preserves the history, preserves tradition. That's another main element of good folklore. And just like any short story or novel, you have to have good characters, you have to have a strong setting, you have to have a good plot, and there's always that conflict. You have to have the conflict in the stories and a resolution, just like any other story. One of the things that come to mind when it comes to folklore is the Grimm fairy tales. If you've read those, I know I had that book when I was a kid, and there are countless stories in there. I loved it. I loved it. Actually, I probably still have that book somewhere. It's a big, thick book. Um, Here locally, Bigfoot, the wood booger. Anybody that's been to Norton and you drive through just downtown Norton, see the Wood Booger Grill, well, that's folklore. That's a restaurant based on good folklore. Um, from folklore, like I said, we learn about our history. We learn about the place that we live in. Young people learn about our values through folklore. And ultimately, who are we in our place and time and community? That's an important question I think that good folklore will answer, unique to a region. And really, it starts with three ingredients. It should, most of the time. One is, it starts with a real event, and then the fear or the mystery surrounding that event. That's the second ingredient. The third ingredient is coming up with a story that explains it. So here's a little exercise for you. You can pause the video and come back to it, or just jot this down and work as, just do this as a writing prompt later on, a couple of paragraphs. But start with this. Here's the exercise. Just write this down. People around here are still talking about the night when fill in the blank. That's kind of a fun exercise. I do love those writing exercises. So that's something we brought up in our in-person meeting, and hopefully some of those folks will take up the challenge and have something to show next time we meet. But I wanted to talk about some of the local legends, right? Some of the local folklore, and we may be very familiar with a lot of these. The first one that come to my mind was the Mothman. Now that took place from 1966 to 1967. That's up in Point Pleasant, West Virginia. They still have the Mothman Festival. I remember I mentioned that's part of the folklore, but they still have that festival up there every year, and you can go up to it and have a great time. It's very fun. They have the Mothman Museum and a big statue in the middle of town. So if you're ever up there, that town is wrought with history. From the first unofficial battle of the Civil War called the Battle of Point Pleasant to the Mothman mysteries. Point Pleasant, West Virginia is a must see if you live in Appalachia. But here's what happened from 1966 to 1967. For those of you that may not know, they started having sightings around there of this tall winged creature. It had red eyes, and they saw it a lot near the TNT bunkers just outside of town. And when those sightings stopped, the Silver Bridge collapsed, and that was in 1967, and it killed 46 people. Now, people around there thought the Mothman was it a sign or a warning or an omen? A lot of stories came out of that. And, the themes of that folklore, premonitions and warnings, that is a great theme for any kind of folklore and short story or novel. But the other theme was the fear of the unexplained. People still see Mothman to this day. There are countless books on it. You can find this movie called The Mothman Prophecies. I think that had Richard Gere in it back in the 90s or early 2000s. So when you look at something like the Mothman mysteries, the Mothman sightings, what's the writing angle? Well, my thought was how modern communities process tragedy by supernatural storytelling. Now that's a great angle. So what angle would you use? There's no limit to creativity. So as I bring these up and I mention a writing angle, maybe you come up with two or three others of your own. The next one was the Greenbrier Ghost. And again, this is in West Virginia. This was 1897. So if you've been to the Greenbrier, you know how beautiful that place is, how gorgeous that region is. But there is a legend there. Zona Hester Shue was her name. Shue. You can do a Google search on this if you want to. She died under suspicious circumstances. And after her death, her mom claimed that Zona's ghost came to her several nights in a row and told her that her husband had killed her, that he had broken her neck. Well, after some time and some complaint and reasons the family wanted, to push forward, they actually exhumed the body. And when they went and examined it, sure enough, her neck was broken. And her husband, that opened the file, that opened the case for them to investigate further. They eventually found her husband guilty and convicted him of murder. Now, oddly, this is really the only case in the U.S. where a ghost testimony helped inspire a criminal investigation right here in our neck of the woods. How cool is that? Tragic story, but that is some amazing folklore. Um, Here are some of the themes of that particular piece of folklore. Justice beyond the grave. That is a powerful, powerful theme. Maternal intuition. That is another powerful theme. And blending the spiritual belief with reality. All strong themes, all part of this one piece of folklore, this one story of the Greenbrier Ghost. Now, what kind of writing angle would you use for folklore like that? Exploring grief would be one. Belief in justice. Okay, that would be another. Um, but I think more specifically, where a lot of people don't think you have justice so much in rural communities, justice in those rural communities, belief in justice there. And sometimes it takes a little something extra than just normal investigation to get it. That's a pretty powerful theme. Now, the next one, the last one I wanted to mention was the Wampus Cat. Some of you may have heard of that. I think this probably goes back to some Native American lore, but this was a legend from the Tennessee North Carolina border area. So described this what this was. The Wampus Cat was described as part woman and part mountain lion. Now that's wild. That kind of makes me think of shapeshifters right away, Native American lore. But this this part woman, part mountain lion had glowing eyes. Now, according to some stories, it was once a woman that was cursed after spying on some sacred rituals. She was told not to go look and investigate, but she did anyway. So she goes and spies where she shouldn't have been, and then this curse happened. So the creature was said to stalk hunters and travelers at night and could scream and howl like a woman. Now, over time, this legend sort of became like a regional cryptid story, kind of like Bigfoot. Um, but there are themes in there. One is punishment for breaking taboos. Another would be fear of the deep woods. That's what you tell your kids around the campfire. Don't go into the woods at night. You might run into the Wampus Cat. Um, a human transformation into a monster is another theme that I think is pretty powerful. So, what kind of writing angle would you have about that? Stories about boundaries, perhaps, between human and wild and sacred and forbidden. Those are some thoughts. What other thoughts would you have, and what other kind of pieces of folklore come to mind for you? There are countless books out there on about our region. Not countless, but there are quite a few. I know Shane Simmons has did one for Eastern Kentucky, one for Southwest Virginia about lore and legend. Interesting books worth picking up. But let's circle back around real quick to the question I'd asked at the very beginning. What modern Appalachian experiences today, in the last 5, 10, 20, 30 years, might eventually become folklore? Because remember, it was back in the 60s when the Silver Bridge collapsed and the Mothman sightings. So we maybe have some things in the works here today. And the kind of the cool thing is that maybe not always necessarily has to do with the woods or the mountain, because technology's changed, times have changed, some of the traditions around here have changed, whether we like it or not. A couple of things came to my mind, and I'll just mention it. How about some of the towns that are dwindling away because of economic repression? Towns that are getting swallowed up by the counties, high schools that are being consolidated together, and some of those old schools with those old memories for decades. Do all those memories die there in the hallways? Or maybe is it still alive? That's kind of an interesting piece of folklore. What about some of the folklore that may come out from, unfortunately, COVID-19? That's a big one. That's a big event that happened. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of folklore comes out of that, and what we as creators and writers can come up with to kind of bring about our values, our shared fears, and our shared hopes through all these new stories that may come out over the years to come. Usually that's, yeah, I would say, hey, that's left up to the people at large, what they like, what they, what kind of things come out just organically. But we are writers, and we are a key part of keeping those stories alive. So that's why we wanted to record this video. Kind of encourage you to consider that. Keep that in mind. Maybe that's something that you write. Maybe it's not in your wheelhouse. Either way, it's a fun topic. Be sure and leave your thoughts below. If you haven't subscribed to the Authors Guild um, YouTube page or Facebook, make sure you join those. Follow along. We have a lot of fun. And hopefully, we'll see you at the next meeting or on a Zoom call soon. Until next time, see you on down the road.